Welcome to the Knowing Moments. I'm your host, Chik. This is a space where we explore the quiet turning points in life and career. The moments when something shifts inside you long before it leads to clarity and change. In the last episode, I shared what happened when I slowed down for the first time in decades. The shock of stillness, the strange feeling of mental withdrawal, and the awareness that slowly started to surface once the noise settled. But slowing down has a funny side effect. Once you create space in your life, a new question eventually arrives. What do I want to grow into next? And honestly, that question is both exciting and unsettling. Because pausing doesn't automatically give you answers. Sometimes it just reveals that the path you have been on, the one that felt natural for so long, may no longer be the only direction forward. Today's episode is called The Space Between Comfort and Growth. It is about a moment many of us eventually experience. That moment when you realize you've become very good at something, maybe even exceptional at it, but a quiet voice inside starts asking, is continuing to optimize the same as growing? So the real question becomes, do I keep strengthening what already works? Or do I stretch into something unfamiliar, where I'm no longer the expert? For me, that exploration started during my sabbatical, and it began with a realization that was both simple and a little uncomfortable. I've spent 28 years at Microsoft. I started as an intern. I grew into engineering leadership. Over time, I learned how to operate at massive scale, building products that are used by millions of customers and billions of users. Leading large organizations, making high-stakes decisions where clarity and risk management matter. Enterprise leadership builds a specific set of muscles in how you think and operate. Pattern recognition, structured thinking, execution discipline, operating through complexity. Those muscles are powerful, and for a long time, they defined how I solved problems. But during my sabbatical, I started asking myself a different question. What haven't I stretched? Because mastery in one arena doesn't automatically make you expensive somewhere else. Sometimes it simply makes you more efficient inside the same boundaries. And growth, real growth, really happens smoothly. Most of the time, it begins with discomfort. Before starting my sabbatical, I knew I wanted to use the time to explore new things, especially around AI. And one idea that kept returning to me was starting a podcast, using AI almost like a thinking partner to help explore new ideas. Now you might wonder, why a podcast? Public speaking has been part of my career for a long time. I've done countless interviews, fireside chats, large team meetings, conference keynotes, and customer presentations around the world. mentoring sessions, sharing learnings from my career, telling stories about leadership and growth. Those moments have always energized me. Over time, storytelling became a skill I developed and refined. I learned how to shape ideas, connect experiences, and share them in ways that resonate with people. So when the idea of starting a podcast first crossed my mind, I assumed it would feel fairly natural. But there was another reason too, a more personal one. For most of my adult life, I have been an engineer. My work has demanded logic, structure, and analytical thinking. That part of my brain has been exercised every day for decades, and I love it. But there's another side of me that hasn't always had as much room. A quieter part that wants to create, to explore ideas more freely, to express something a little more artistic. Sabbatical gave me the rare opportunity to listen to that part of myself. And podcasting started to feel like a doorway, a small portal into that creative space I hadn't fully explored before. But that's more than creativity. It's also a way for me to show up more vulnerably, to share experiences not just as an executive or as a leader, but as a human being navigating change, uncertainty, and growth, just like everyone else. A way to be a little bit more authentic, a little less polished, a little more fully myself. And podcasting felt like the right medium for that. A place where I could think out loud, tell stories, and maybe discover a different dimension of myself along the way. But the moment I actually started, I realized how little I knew. What topic, which audience, which category, what format, how often, and beyond these, there were all the mechanics. Writing for audio, recording properly, sound editing, hosting platforms, distribution, marketing. At Microsoft, when I prepare for a keynote or public engagement, there's an entire team supporting every dimension: communications, production, logistics. For this project, it was just me, the entrepreneur, the writer, the producer, the technician, the marketer, all in one. And something that initially felt intuitive quickly became humbling. As an entrepreneur, I had to sharpen the positioning. Who is this for? What is the differentiated message? Why would someone choose to listen? As a writer, I had to ask myself, do I truly have a story worth telling? Is it distinct? Is it personal enough? As the artist, I had to think about rhythm and emotional tone. And as a technician, I had to learn hardware, software, and the systems I had never used before. There were moments when I thought, maybe I'm not good enough at this. Maybe this is just a distraction. I'm not a professional content creator. I'm not a media entrepreneur. And that realization felt uncomfortable. Because in enterprise environments, competence is visible and measurable. You know what you're good at. But in 0 to 1 creation, uncertainty is everywhere. And suddenly, I am a beginner again. After Antarctica during the holidays, I had a quiet realization. I had spent far too much time debating the perfect positioning instead of simply building something. And I remember thinking, why am I trying to design the perfect idea instead of just starting? So I changed the question. What if the sabbatical itself became the material? What if I simply document what I'm learning in real time instead of waiting for certainty? I could build while discovering. And suddenly the pressure lifted. The podcast didn't have to be theoretical. It could simply be lived. And that's how episode 1 came into existence. To get started, I realized I needed to create the right environment, something tangible that signaled my commitment. So I began with a setup. I researched podcast recording equipment far more seriously than I expected. Microphones, boom arms, audio interfaces, headphones. And in true Joyce fashion, I didn't choose the most basic option. I ordered the same recording microphone that's used by Amy Poehler for her award-winning podcast. It felt slightly indulgent, but also symbolic. If I was going to do this, I wanted to do it properly. The setup gave me momentum. It felt like a concrete first step, a way of saying to myself, this is real. From there, I turned to structure. I used AI to explore possible formats, thinking through audience, cadence, positioning. With the sabbatical at the center of the story, I began drafting potential titles. Even that required more thought than I anticipated. Naming something is clarifying. It forces you to define intent. Over the holidays, the phrase, when you know, kept returning to me. It captured something about the subtle turning points of this season. I experimented with variations, asked friends for input, compared options, and then, almost without noticing, I found myself stuck again. Not because the name mattered that much, but because I was trying to perfect it before moving forward. After a couple days in that loop, I made a different decision. Instead of refining the edges, I would begin with substance. So I started writing. Not polished scripts, just reflections, observations from the first few weeks of the sabbatical. And that shift from debating to doing finally moved the project forward. Once I began writing, something shifted. It felt more fluid than I expected, almost liberating. Instead of trying to document every detail of my sabbatical, I focused on a few meaningful aha moments, the insights that lingered and kept returning to me. From there, I began building stories around them, expanding certain sections, trimming others, reordering ideas so the narrative flowed more naturally. My years of public speaking helped here. Over time, I've developed an instinct for storytelling, sensing when a story moves naturally and when something feels forced. But writing for this podcast felt different from public speaking. There was a freedom in it, a freedom to express thoughts and emotions that I don't always say out loud, especially during this season of sabbatical. In some ways, the process became therapeutic. It allowed me to reflect more honestly on what I was experiencing. And at the same time, it felt liberating because it unlocked something I hadn't exercised very often in my career: the creative, more artistic side of myself, a side that has been quietly waiting for space. But writing was only part of the process. Recording turned out to be an entirely different world. In my corporate life, this stage is mostly invisible to me. There's usually an entire team behind the scenes handling technical production, logistics, and audio quality. Here, it was just me. With AI acting as my assistant, I began exploring different recording tools and platforms. And let me tell you, audio software is its own universe. The number of settings and adjustments was overwhelming. To keep myself moving, I made a simple decision. Choose the most straightforward tool possible. Less friction, more momentum. And then I realized something else. Audio mixing and editing is another whole domain, one I could easily spend weeks learning and optimizing. But I didn't want to get stuck in that loop, so I made another decision. Instead of spending hours perfecting the editing process, I challenged myself to record the first version in a single take. Not perfect, but complete. And I did. That moment taught me something important. Progress matters more than polish. Moving forward mattered more than optimizing. And that led to an even bigger shift in how I approached the whole project. I made a commitment to myself to finish the entire process, from idea to a complete but not yet polished episode. It was tempting to perfect one piece before moving on to the next. But instead, I pushed myself to experience the full life cycle first, to build the whole thing once and then improve it later. That mindset felt more entrepreneurial, not optimizing individual pieces, but shipping the whole thing into the world and trusting that the next version will always be better. Early in the process, I spoke with a seasoned podcaster who has built a large platform over many years. I asked for advice. 3 things stayed with me. First, differentiation. Be clear about the unique perspective you bring. Not just what you want to say, but what only you can say. Second, focus. Choose your audience intentionally. Don't try to speak to everyone. Deliver consistent value to a specific group first. And third, feedback. Before publishing, share early recordings with people you trust. Listen carefully. Refine. So after finishing the first episode, I sent it to 25 friends immediately. Their feedback was generous and honest. Some wanted more structure. Some asked for more vulnerability. Some suggested framing ideas. And that feedback was incredibly helpful. But I also realized something important. If I incorporated every suggestion, the result would feel designed by committee. So instead, I looked for patterns, signal, not noise. That balance, openness combined with conviction is a founder's skill. And then there was discipline. In corporate life, deadlines are defined externally. During my sabbatical, no one was waiting for this podcast. It wasn't public yet, which makes procrastination easy. So I created my own deadline because when structure disappears, discipline has to come from within. As I reflect on this podcast journey, a few lessons have become clearer. These are not dramatic breakthroughs, but steady realizations. Learning number 1, Growth lives in discomfort. It's easy to keep strengthening what we are already good at. Expertise is validating. Predictability is reassuring. But if I only operate where I'm competent, growth becomes incremental, if not non-existent. Choosing to build from zero has been uncomfortable, but discomfort is directional. It shows where expansion is possible. Learning number 2. Doing reduces fear faster than thinking. Debating did not eliminate uncertainty. Recording did, editing did, publishing did. Action transforms the abstraction into experience. Once I completed the full cycle, fear faded to the background, more like a shadow. Experience teaches more than speculation. Learning number 3. Listen, iterate, and create your own discipline. Feedback matters. Iteration matters. But conviction matters too. Synthesize input, but don't lose your voice, and create your own deadlines, because growth requires structure, even in freedom. I don't know exactly where my experiment will lead. What I do know is this: I'm no longer measuring progress the same way. For most of my career, success was defined by scale. But during this season of experimentation, the metrics look different. Did I learn something new? Did I stretch beyond what was comfortable? Did I finish something I started? Did I ship? There's no guarantee this podcast becomes something large. There's no guarantee these early explorations lead to a specific outcome. But one thing is certain: if I don't experiment, growth is impossible. And that realization has been grounding. Because this season isn't about abandoning what I've built. It's about expanding it, adding new muscles, allowing myself to become a beginner again, intentionally. Transition doesn't always require a dramatic leap. Sometimes it's quieter, a recalibration of how you define growth, of what success means, of who you are willing to become next. So if you are listening and you find yourself somewhere between comfort and expansion, maybe a few questions are worth sitting with. Where in your life have you become very good, but maybe a little too comfortable? What new muscle might be waiting for you to stretch? Is there something you've been thinking about trying, but haven't started it yet? And if you gave yourself permission to experiment without needing a perfect outcome, what might you begin? Because sometimes the shift begins long before the decision, and sometimes growth starts with a small experiment. And in my case, those small experiments were quietly leading me towards a much bigger question. Not just about what I wanted to build, but about what might come next. And that's the story I will share in the next episode. And when you know, you know. This is the Knowing Moments. I'm Joy Chik. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.